your video on too, that'd be great. Thank you. So my name is John Patterson Williams, and I am the coordinator of the Prairie Habitat Joint Ventures Policy Committee. And I want to welcome you all here this morning, and we're very excited to hear from Caroline. Just a bit of background first. This is the second our theme on grassland conservation initiatives, the second webinar. Next month, we'll be hearing from Alberta, and then in January from the Joint Venture 8. And in February, I believe we'll be hearing from Manitoba. So we're right in the thick of it here. And so I would encourage you to join if you can and learn more about this ecosystem and the initiatives that have been in place to protect it. Today, I want to welcome Carolyn Gaudet. She is I hope I pronounced that right, but she is the manager of the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan. And Carolyn is a graduate of the University of Regina and with a bachelor's and master's degree in biology. She has worked with various partners of the PCAPP group, including Nature Saskatchewan, Grasslands National Park, and the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Centre. She's been working with this organization since March 2017, so has a good grasp, I would imagine, at this time of everything that's happening there. So I want to welcome you, Carolyn, and also just say that at the end we'll be having questions. Ian will be facilitating those questions as I am slipping off to teach a course at 11, so I kind of have to juggle a bit this term. So thank you, Ian, thank you, Carolyn, and thank all of you for joining us today. So please feel free to go ahead.
So thank you, John and the PHV for the invitation to speak today, and good morning to everyone. So I'm currently in Regina. So I'm in Treaty 4 territory, which includes the territories of the Nahiawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. And they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life that these areas sustain. And we would like to acknowledge and thank them for that. So today I'll go through PCAPP's mission and vision, the history of PCAPP and a few past accomplishments, and our current framework and activities. And before I get into it, I just wanted to mention that the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan is a non-advocacy partnership. So we focus on sharing evidence-based information and giving partners opportunities to kind of reduce duplication and increase collaboration. So our mission is the PCAPP partnership represents the collaborative efforts of multiple interests toward promoting and conserving Saskatchewan's native prairie. The PCAPP partners work together to deliver innovative and critical prairie conservation activities that represent the shared objectives of a diverse mix of stakeholders and that benefit the social, cultural, economic, and ecological fabric of Saskatchewan. And our vision is healthy native prairie ecosystems as vital parts of our vibrant and strong communities. So the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan brings together 33 partners consisting of producers, industry, provincial and federal governments, environmental, non-government organizations, and educational institutions working together towards a common vision of prairie and species at risk conservation in Saskatchewan. So here we have our 33 partners listed. Each PCAPP partner provides a representative that sits on the PCAPP steering committee, and that steering committee guides the 5-year framework and participates in our meetings, which are typically twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. So partner representatives also supply a short report for the meetings, just on their initiatives, to keep the partnership updated on what they're doing, as well as a few other things that they need to do. And in addition to having a steering committee, we also have an executive committee, which consists of representatives from these 5 organizations that are bolded and underlined. So they kind of oversee the overall direction of PCAPP. So I would prepare the annual work plan and set the budget for the year and send it to the executive for approval. They also approve hiring staff of additional staffing positions and raises and things like that. So partners can join the partnership by either submitting a request to join or being formally asked to join. The potential partner would present at a meeting telling us about themselves and how they would be a good fit, and then the steering committee would decide by consensus whether they actually are a good fit. Potential partners need to be a recognized organization, agency, or association, and they need to support the goals of the PCAPP framework and the principles. So I'll just go through the 8 guiding principles now. So there's the power of the collective. So we can accomplish more acting together than we can alone. Partnerships, we bring diverse groups to work together under a common vision for prairie conservation. An integrated approach. So we approach prairie conservation in a way that integrates the ecological, sociocultural, and economic interests related to native prairie conservation issues. Adaptability. We seek and adapt to new knowledge, hopefully with enthusiasm and creativity. The sustainable use of prairie. So we see prairie as a working landscape that can include people and their livelihoods as a positive part of the ecosystem. So we view sustainable uses of prairie as fundamental to its conservation. The intrinsic value of prairie, we recognize that prairie ecosystems and the species found within them have intrinsic value beyond any human use. Engaging people, we believe people who understand prairie learn to value prairie, and people who value prairie will work to conserve it. And then there's the commitment to action. So the PCAPP partnership is a action-orientated organization. We set implementation plans and commit to achieving measurable results that contribute to the goals of the partnership. And before I get into the goals, which fits better into the framework part, I will just go over some of PCAPP's history. So I'm just gonna have a drink. The first Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAPP, was developed in the late 1980s through an initiative that was led by World Wildlife Fund Canada. And it was for Prairie Canada as a whole. The major concerns of that first PCAPP were the protection of Canada's remaining native prairie and its associated species at risk. So the time frame for the plan was between 1989 and 1994, and it had 10 principal goals that were to be achieved in those 5 years. And these are things like identifying the remaining native prairie and parkland, protecting at least one large representative area in each of the 4 major prairie ecoregions, establishing across the 3 prairie provinces a system of protected native prairie ecosystems and, where possible, connection corridors, which are, those are only 3 out of the 10, and those are pretty tall orders. So while that first PCAPP provided a visionary master plan for the conservation of prairie species and spaces, it really lacked the mechanisms to ensure that the actions were executed and the results were monitored. So it was left to the goodwill of the participants to take on those tasks that they could and then work to realize those 10 goals kind of on their own. So an ad hoc committee reviewed that 1989 plan, and they found that none of the goals were fully met, and there were a few that had seen very little progress. And there were some issues, there are no coordinated implementation strategy There was a lack of time-specific assigned responsibilities to carry out the tasks, and there was also like no specific funding for the plan, just to like name a few. And so they also found that the action plan wasn't effective because of the lack of involvement from the agricultural sector, so like ranchers and land managers. So then Saskatchewan Environment and Resource Management and the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association established a process to renew the plan. And they brought together a partnership of various provincial and federal organizations and agencies, and they called themselves the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan Committee to revise and create a new version of the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan. And that was formalized in 1998 with 16 partners. So then over the last 23 years, like the partners, funders, objectives, and activities have changed. And many of the folks that were involved at the beginning often credits PCAPP's success over the years with its connection to ranchers and stewards. And that connection is primarily through the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association. So Saskatchewan PCAPP is technically a subcommittee of the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association, or SSGA. SSGA provides a chairperson for the PCAPP meetings, and that chairperson also acts as a spokesperson if it's ever needed. The PCAPP office is housed in the SSGA office here in Regina, and we also get like administrative support, so with the audit and financial statements and things like that. Chad, who's the SSGA general manager, kind of oversees supervising myself and does like kind of those HR things like approving like travel and expense claims and things like that. And so Chad and the executive committee combined are kind of act as my supervisor. So SSG also provides that connection to the agriculture industry. So pre-pandemic, being in the office with the SSGA staff was always a good way to keep up in terms of like policies and news and how it affects ranchers and producers. It provides a different point of view rather than just like that grassland ecology lens that I typically see through. And so that's something that I've really missed since we've been working from home. SSG also provides in-kind contributions, such as like space for articles in the Beef Business magazine, and that goes out to 10,000 subscribers. So we provide like 5 articles a year to their magazine, and these articles can be about species at risk or grassland management or invasive species. I think the next one coming out in January will be about how grazing affects carbon sequestration, and so we can get our like messages out to kind of like a target audience through that in-kind contribution. And many of our, I guess, like social media campaigns or articles for the general public often stress the importance of ranchers as stewards of grasslands. I think for a long time, beef producers were often overlooked for their work and dedication to grassland ecosystems. I think it's improving with a few I guess initiatives, like there's that Guardians of the Grasslands short film that came out a couple of years ago and those kinds of things, so that's nice. And since I've started at PCAPP, I've had a few people comment on how surprised they are that like Saskatchewan PCAPP is a part of SSGA, and I don't know if it's because they just think that we're like another like ENGO, or they're not really aware of what PCAPP is, but it works for us. So here are a few accomplishments over the years. Saskatchewan was the first province to proclaim like an official like grass emblem. We've won a few awards because of the partnership. It's been used as an example for other grassland partnerships, like in Mexico. We've helped create rangeland and riparian health guides. And we hosted the first Native Prairie Restoration Reclamation Workshop, which I'll talk about a bit more later. So here are kind of like the past frameworks. We've had 4 previous, and they've changed from being called action plans to frameworks for action over the years. The first 2 plans were quite ambitious. They had 5 goals and 25 objectives and 78 actions. And each of those actions had partner leads and partners associated with doing them. And so there was a lot of the partners contributed to these actions and deliverables. And there are a lot of successes in those early plans. But we've since moved away from an action plan to a framework for action. And the steering committee, develops the framework to guide PCAPP's activities. And although the PCAPP partners initiatives kind of fall and fit within the objectives and strategies in the frameworks, they aren't reported on the way that they used to be. So we're currently halfway through our 5th framework or plan. It's very similar to the previous framework with a few tweaks. It's available on our website if anyone wanted to have a look. On my last slide, there'll be our website, or you can just Google Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan. So the steering committee identified 3 strategic focus areas to prioritize actions. And these are those 3 focus areas. There's Native Prairie awareness and appreciation, responsible land use on Native Prairie, and Native Prairie ecosystem management. And I'll talk a bit about those in a minute. But each focus area has a list of strategies and measures of success. And many of our activities may fall within more than one focus area, or we address various strategies using the same activity. And so to achieve an integrated approach to prairie conservation, each of those focus areas addresses the 3 PCAPP partnership goals. So there's the ecosystem goal, which is Native Prairie ecosystem health and biodiversity are conserved and restored as part of a functioning landscape. The cultural goal, which is Native Prairie is a valued part of our culture and identity as a Saskatchewan people, and our economic goal. So sustainable uses of Native Prairie improve the livelihood of Saskatchewan people. So our first focus area is Native Prairie awareness and appreciation, and the objective is to increase awareness of the ecological, cultural, and economic importance of Native Prairie and biodiversity, which includes species at risk, among students, the general public, industry, and policymakers. And so one very successful activity that addresses various strategies in the framework is our Native Prairie speaker series. So I'll bring it up a few times. But PCAPP has had a speaker series for over 10 years. It started as in-person presentations that were either technical or for a general audience. And it was usually balanced between the 2. There would be 7 technical presentations and 7 general presentations in a given year. And then a few years ago, in 2016 or 2015, PCAPP started webinars rather than just in-person presentations that were recorded and available online afterwards. And it's been successful since. We've seen increased success since the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone was stuck at home, so our attendance has doubled and hasn't gone back to pre-pandemic numbers yet. So that's good. Between the live webinar and the YouTube views, each presentation is usually watched by over 220 people on average. And so under this Native Prairie awareness and appreciation focus area, we have a strategy to share evidence-based knowledge So our speaker series is very effective for that. And then we have our Native Prairie Appreciation Week, which was started in 1999, and it offers excellent opportunities to promote Native Prairie and species at risk to the general public, especially messages about the important role that livestock producers play in conserving and managing Native Prairie. So Native Prairie Appreciation Week, we call it NPA for short, occurs in the third week of June. And so for many years, there was an annual tour as part of NPA, which was led by the SRM, the Society for Range Management, the Prairie Parkland chapter. But then in 2016, it went to every other year. So there will be a tour in 2022 in Southwest Saskatchewan. So there'll be like training available for plant ID and presentations about rangeland management. So I'm really looking forward to being out in the field again for that. In 2020, we had planned a tour with the SRM that had to be canceled because of the pandemic. And so we kind of pivoted and started like a webinar series during NPA that was well received. And we also continued it in 2021. Other NPA activities usually include like a kids poster contest, a social media photo contest, handing out native seeds at farmers markets. There's also a declaration by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment, as well as declarations in the major cities in the province, just to increase awareness. And so there's like media releases and interviews that go along with those as well. Our other method to increase appreciation and awareness is through social media. So Caitlin Moreau-Seiler, who's our stewardship coordinator, she takes care of like the social media aspect of PCAPP and also the Native Prairie Speaker Series, as well as a bunch of other things. She's kind of a jack of all trades, and I call on her often. So Caitlin prepares like a social media campaign once a month, and it started as like SAR sweet tweets, so species at risk sweet tweets, so tweets are on Twitter, where information about a species at risk was shared for a week, like things like their habitat and the reasons for why they're declining and things like that. But we have expanded these social media campaigns to include like invasive species or general information like a pollinator week or a migratory bird week, because we ran out of species at risk pretty quickly. We also have a monthly newsletter that is shared with over 2,000 subscribers, where we share information about upcoming events, prairie-related news articles. There's a spot for partner spotlights where PCAPP partners can highlight an initiative that they're currently working on, and also like general information about upcoming PCAPP activities. Education has also been an important component of PCAPP's activities. PCAPP has been doing education programs since the early 2000s, and education programs have changed over the years. We used to have large traveling programs where PCAPP and partner volunteers would take over a school for a day with educational activities for all ages. And then they would be on the road going from school to school for 2 weeks. And so there was a lot of like opportunities to teach kids about Native Prairie and species at risk and why they're at risk. And they would often get to see like a live burrowing owl from the Saskatchewan Burrowing Owl Interpretive Center. So that was always a highlight. But it was, I guess, logistically complicated to plan. So more recently, our programs are like at a smaller scale, and we don't need to enlist half a dozen partners for 2 weeks. So we have 2 like main education programs and that are coordinated by our education coordinator, who is Julianne Howe. The first is Adopt a Rancher, which is for grade 10s, and the kids learn about a ranch ecosystem. They develop a case study, they have the opportunity to ask the rancher questions, and then they take a field trip to the ranch. So many kids who have little connection to Native Prairie have never seen it. So we give them that opportunity through this program. And then we have Taking Action for Prairie, which is for grades 6 to 8. And it's a curriculum-based action-orientated program. So the kids go through a presentation, demonstrates a concept. So like grade 6s do biodiversity, the grade 7s would do learn about the human impact on the ecosystem and sustainability. And then the grade 8s would be, they would learn about water systems. And so then after the activity, the classroom would develop their own action plan, like as a class, which vary from class to class. There have been like recycling programs and picking weeds or garbage in a natural area, or like water conservation campaigns for their school and so on. So we're trying to get kids to become kind of like active members of society, kind of in their own way. And then there's Agribition. So we usually have a booth in the Agri-Ed Pavilion at Agribition, where we talk about species at risk and the importance of stewardship in native prairie. And we also have a game show called Pitch for Pipits and Plovers, which is for grades 3 to 6 during that Agribition week. But Agribition won't have Agri-Ed Pavilion this year because the school divisions decided not to send their kids. So there won't be those like 10,000 kids that there usually is at Agribition. So we won't have a booth, but our Species at Risk NESC activity and the game show were like modified for virtual delivery last year, as were all of our education programs. So we will be able to share those messages that way. And so we'll be promoting them in the coming weeks because Agribition is next week. Our second focus area is responsible land use on native prairie. So the objective is to provide land users with balanced, evidence-based information about the ecological, economic, and cultural influences, and promote the beneficial management practices to sustain healthy native prairie and species at risk populations within a working landscape while mitigating adverse impacts. So here we have the speaker series again. So we have a few strategies under this focus area, like understanding current types of development. So we've had a few presentations on the effects of oil and gas development on grassland songbirds. We also had the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment present about their Prairie Landscape Inventory Initiative. So we try to find speakers or content that fit within these like framework strategies. We also have the Prairie's Got the Goods Week, which was started in 2017. And so that occurs in March each year. And it was started as a way to share information about ecological goods and services provided by native prairie. So it's not only like what ecological goods and services there are in native prairie. So it's not just, oh, native prairie filters water and it sequesters carbon, but it goes beyond that with current research and other information. So we have another strategy under this focus area about sharing knowledge about the values and benefits derived from native prairie as a working landscape. So during our Prairie's Got the Goods Week, we had presentations about linking rotational grazing with greenhouse gas dynamics, or how cattle grazing affects water infiltration and things like that. So we are trying to kind of touch a few strategies using the same activities, depending on the content of the presentations. Also under this focus area, we have a strategy to engage and interact with key policymakers, stakeholders, and the public about the value of native prairie as a working landscape. And we often put our native prairie restoration reclamation workshop under that strategy. So the reclamation and restoration workshop started in 2011. The PCAPP manager at the time, Michelle Clark, had a few discussions with partners and saw a need for sharing information about native prairie restoration and seeding native species. Environment and Climate Change Canada's Habitat Stewardship Program had like a habitat enhancement component where they would cost share seeding like tame forages, and then they decided to focus only on native species. And so the coordinators of the NGOs that were, I guess, coordinating this habitat enhancement program had a hard time finding information. Like there were a few experts to consult, but there were no really like how-to guides, which is how like the Native Prairie Restoration Reclamation workshop came to be. So PCAPP provides an opportunity for those that are restoring native prairie to share information on how to do it. It's grown beyond just seeding native species to include like how to restore other aspects of native prairie. So microorganisms and biocrust and new techniques for like sagebrush plugs. And there's also the industry side, like bioremediation and things like that. How to clean the soil to prepare it for restoration or reclamation. We're currently planning our 9th Native Prairie Restoration Reclamation workshop in February. It'll be another like virtual event with 3 days of presentations and case studies. There's more information on our website. Registration is currently open, and we have like a draft schedule online as well, if anyone wanted to check it out. Our third focus area is native prairie ecosystem management. So the objective here is to promote the importance of land management knowledge and adoption of practices that have a positive impact on biodiversity, species at risk, and the prairie ecosystem health, including carbon sequestration and climate change. So under this focus area, we have a strategy about sharing information about disturbance processes. So we have a prescribed fire presentation planned for later this month. We also plan workshops for landowners. We collaborated with Nature Saskatchewan on 2 virtual workshops last spring with various information that might be of interest to landowners. Pre-pandemic, these workshops would have been in a local community with PCAPP's workshop in the afternoon with presentations and a ranch planning activity. And then the supper and more presentations in the evening would be planned by Nature Saskatchewan. And so by working together, we can increase the number of attendees, which is also always good. And in the case of the virtual workshops, working together like reduced duplication because we were planning on doing exactly the same thing. So we just combined like both of our events and worked together. We also have a strategy to provide access to decision-making tools, either to develop or promote access to them. So PCAPP developed this Native Prairie Guide in 2016. I think it was prepared for a Native Prairie Appreciation Week tour. And so it provides instructions on how to calculate like animal unit months or the carrying capacity of a pasture, in case that's something that you're interested in learning about. Also in 2016, or since 2016, we've been developing guides to manage for optimal habitat attributes. So we've completed 9 of these guides so far. They were based off of the Greater Sage Grouse Guide that was developed by Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, Inc. after the Emergency Protection Order for sage grouse came into effect. And so it was to help landowners understand the habitat needs of sage grouse. And so the guides that PCAPP have completed include burrowing owl, piping plover, loggerhead shrike, northern leopard frog, beard sparrow, chestnut-colored longspur, monarch, little brown bat, and swift fox. And those are also all available on our website. And so each of the background documents for these guides were developed with information from recovery strategies and peer-reviewed articles. And then we had a workshop with species experts to review that background information. These guides also include something called an Environmental Benefit Index, or EBI. And the EBI is designed to be used by stakeholders so that they can prioritize sites and or projects for conservation and recovery programs, or by land managers to evaluate the value of their property for a particular species. And so, as I mentioned, they're available on our website under like for landowners. So after we developed these individual guides, we decided that we needed to combine them. The habitat needs of many species may overlap or contrast, so we wanted to have them kind of all in one place for landowners to kind of like compare and take into account multiple species instead of just the one. So the multi-species guide also describes the habitat availability by ecosite. So the ecosite maps for Saskatchewan were overlain with the suitable habitat models to predict which species occur on which ecosite. And we're currently in the review process for this multi-species guide. We'll be sending out the final draft for review, and we'll have a virtual workshop on December 1st. So hopefully it will be available by the end of the fiscal year. So that's all I have in terms of our, like an overview of our projects and activities. Here's a list of our financial supporters for this fiscal year. At the top is our like core funding. So those are PCAPP partners that contribute financially to PCAPP. We also have sponsorship for the speaker series in our education programs. And then the Native Prairie Restoration Reclamation Workshop also has its own set of sponsors that are usually like industry related. And so we really appreciate all the financial support that we receive that allows us to continue our various programs and initiatives. And that's all I had for today. That was just, again, a brief overview of what our programs and activities are and how PCAPP works. You can email me at the email address here if you have any questions after the question period. I have also included our website if you want to look for anything like the guides or register for the restoration workshop or anything like that. Yeah, so I can take any questions if there are any.
Great, thank you for your presentation, Carolyn. That was very informative. If you do have a question, please feel free to either raise your hand or type it into the chat box. Go ahead, Susie. You feel free to ask your question.
Good morning and or good afternoon. Thank you so much. This is very interesting. I have a question. First of all, I'm with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Crops. So we're focused on people who grow grains and oilseeds. And of course, most of them are in the prairies, and that's where most of our members are. And I notice you do a lot of outreach to the general public, to policymakers, to students. And I just took a quick look again at your partners. And how do you reach those crop farmers that may be looking at converting native prairie to annual cropland? Or is that part of your mandate or your work?
We don't necessarily try to reach them. Like we have partners that do, like they do their own work and they try to reach those groups, but it doesn't really fit into what we're trying to do. We're like focusing on native prairie, and we do have a strategy to kind of talk about like how the conversion of native prairie, how that affects like carbon and things like that. Yeah. But we haven't touched on that one yet, or haven't been able to. Yeah, so it's not really in our playbook, I guess.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
The reason I'm asking is because when we developed a code of practice, which is still in draft form, we paid a lot of attention to land conversion because it does impact in the marketplace where you need a certification to enter certain markets. And we looked at, we felt, or our experts, some of whom are on the line today, we felt that native grassland was the most critical habitat. Ducks might disagree somewhat, but that in terms of wetlands, but it in terms of being able to restore or turn it back from annual cropland. And our discussion with farmers, well, first of all, they didn't like us, even though we're an industry group, telling them what to do with their land. but second, they seem to be more open to preservation of grassland than wetlands, for example. So I'm mentioning it because there may be an opportunity to connect with us and to even talk at one of our meetings, just to give the members more understanding about what it is that you do. So great presentation, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Doesn't appear to be any right now, but if people do have questions going forward, please do feel free to contact John or Carolyn, and I'm sure they'll be John will pass on any questions you have, or contact Carolyn directly. I do thank everybody for taking the time to attend today's presentation. And again, thank you, Carolyn. This was an outstanding presentation as well. And we look forward to seeing you all again in December. Everybody, have a great day, everybody. And thank you for attending.